Hello and welcome to my project. My name is Brittany Davis, a student at Moreland University, and I'm going to be presenting my project on online versus traditional learning. I have done a very extensive research project to share some results on what I have found. The main purpose of this study was to observe if students were receiving the same quality of education online as they were at home. Many students started out online with the beginning of the year and then returned back to the school. Starting with my introduction, before the pandemic, I was working in South Korea and immediately returned home as soon as the pandemic had started. I have returned to Tampa, Florida, where I immediately found a job because a lot of teachers had quit. Schools had reopened, and a lot of teachers did not want to return to the school. Some parents were of the mind to return the students to school, while some parents were not. Starting the school, I was told I would teach students online as well as in class at the same time. Throughout the year, I managed to find my own difficulties as a teacher, but I've noticed some of my students struggling as well. Halfway through the year, parents were given the option to return their students back to school. Half of my students returned to school, while the other half stayed. I was curious as to why that might be, which is what prompted this research project. A brief literature review. As a teacher myself, I'm well aware that classroom management is of the utmost importance when teaching a class, keeping the students engaged, and having them stay focused on the lesson. I wanted to look up why management was so important and how it can be applied to online learning. I was curious about the social issues that could come with online learning as well. Will everyone have access to online learning? Is everyone able to have the same experience throughout the room? Through my research, I found two prior research projects on the topic of online learning. Dario Shahan had found a very negative outlook, while Maureen Haney and Tracy Newvine had found a positive outlook. Both research projects did a similar approach I did, where they sent out surveys. The only main difference I noticed with their surveys and my surveys were their participants were college students. All of my participants were elementary students. So, of course, in my opinion, both of the outcomes are going to be different. Adults in college have a different understanding of education than, of course, fifth, sixth, younger students do. I was glad I was able to see their side of things because I was able to pull both a positive and negative side of online learning. My methodology. I sent surveys to the parents and sat and had an open interview with my students. I sent my survey to 10 parents, and of the 10 parents, I received 5 responses. I did an open interview with my students, of which were 5 girls and 4 boys. 8 students had returned to a school, and 1 student that had remained at home. I was happy to have a mix of students, and everyone was willing to share their experience, what they thought, and it was a very great experience. I'm glad I was able to do. I was slightly taken aback with some of my parents only responding with 5 of them. However, once I got the results, it made way more sense as to why I only received 5 responses. An analysis of my results. Looking at the positive side of things, my students were very pleased with the convenience, the freedom, and the amenities. Some of the conveniences, of course, included the ability to stay in bed until the very last minute. One of my students was very happy that he was able to wear his fluffy pajamas at bottoms, wear his blanket. They were allotted more freedom at recess. They were able to go outside in their backyard, play with their pets, play with their siblings. And as far as amenities, my students were happy to have a hot lunch every single day from their parent who was also at home with them. They were able to watch TV when they were given their free time. As soon as class was over for them, there was no car line, there was no ride home, there was no traffic, just way more convenience than actually having to be in the classroom. For my parents, they were very happy for the safety. There was no virus, of course, in their house. They were able to monitor their child to make sure they were clean, they were washing their hands. And one parent brought up something very interesting. There was no bullying, she pointed out. She was happy that her child was not around other students who could make her feel bad about herself. She was home with her every day and able to build her up and talk her up. One parent was very pleased with the family time. Once she pointed out how she was able to always take her family out. There was no waiting around. They were able to have a family dinner every day because not only were her children home, but her husband was home as well. Everybody was home because of the virus. And of course, convenience, where both of them connected. Convenience overall was the best factor. Most of my parents cannot stand waiting in the car line, which is a line for parents who have to wait before they pick up their student. There are no buses due to the virus, so parents at the moment have to wait in line to pick up their child. And of course, there's the commute, there's getting up early, there's everything in between. Being online just basically provides a convenience for everyone involved. Looking at the negatives. On my student side, of course, my students were missing that social interaction with their friends. As I gather they would often say online, "What's happening? Who said that?" or what's going on? I wish I was there. A lot of the issues came from our technical difficulties. As we know, if you're going to be a student online, you're reliant 100% on the internet. So be it nice weather, power lines are down, there's a shortage, anything. And the internet has to be working on both sides for it to work. There would be times the school would have a power outage or it's raining too hard. We live in the southern side of North America where it rains quite a bit. Oftentimes our internet would go down due to the weather. One of my students pointed out he had to work a little harder because he wasn't there to ask questions to me directly. Or if the internet was out and an assignment was due the next day, he had found a very hard time getting able to get me on the phone to talk to me about it. He felt that the work did not match the same amount of work when they had in class because they would have in-class time, and when they were online, they would point out they would turn off their computer and do other things. Some of the negatives from my parents' side, of course, technical difficulties. Parents found it just as frustrating as the students. They were unable to get a hold of the teacher. They were unable to get a hold of anybody if there was a problem. They would call and call and call, saying, "I tried." But, of course, if the internet's down, more than one parent is calling. One parent was very concerned about the child's mental health. She stated she was uncomfortable with having her child sit in front of a computer screen for hours on end and would often let her leave her house to go to her backyard, but would miss some of the lesson. One parent pointed out it required almost more attention to watch the student and to make sure they're paying attention and not on the internet. One parent pointed out it felt like they had a second job. I wanted to point out my own observation. While teaching students that were once online and that returned back to school, I noticed an increase academically. Some of my students who were in fact struggling working online are doing much better now that they're in class. I'm able to spend more time with them. I'm able to do faster and better assessments on them. I've noticed that parent involvement is quite necessary to obtain student success. As I pointed out before, these are still children, and children require parental and adult supervision at almost all times. I am thankful that online does allow more freedom. My students and myself, when working online, are able to assign work and leave it at that. Some of my assignments don't require me standing in front of them, lecturing, writing on the board. At sometimes they're able to read and write merely on their own and require very little supervision from me. Looking toward the future, it's obvious that technology is there and quite possible the education of the future. Is it going to be the only education of the future? That is still yet to be determined. There are still a few things we as a society have to work on. We still have minor issues of accountability, accessibility, online checking in, payments, everything. One thing I really want to discuss is what about the students in need? During my observation, I noticed one of my students had moved online, and that was the last I've seen of him. When I've spoken to the parent, they claim they don't have the internet, nor the resources or money to buy a computer. So who provides the computers for students in need? My school pointed out we can no longer give them out as we get run out. So who's responsible? How do we prevent students from being left behind? The government, the school, the parent. Also, I want to speak on accessibility. What about merely internet? Not just the computer, but internet as well. Is free internet provided to everybody or just those in quote-unquote need? A quick summary of my findings. Online learning is clearly here to stay. There are things we need to work on, but it's here to stay and will not be removed at any time. There are things that need to be worked on, such as who's responsible for getting students the education so that no child is left behind. More rules need to be set in place so that students are held accountable, grades are turned in, assignments are there, students are in class. If both parents are working, who's going to see to it that students are there? There are a few concerns, but also major perks with online learning. I'm very much looking forward to the things that come from it. Some challenges I faced. Of course, I have my own personal biases. As a teacher who was already teaching online students, I had a couple of things I had grievances about. Of course, I'm human, and there were also some things I also enjoyed. Parent and student cooperation. Some of my parents, of course, did not return their surveys. Some of my students completely zoned out during my interview. But that's fine. I was still able to receive a lot of feedback. I had a small pool to work from. I pulled only from my class. I could have pulled from other classes, but with the time constraint, I only had the time for my own students. And of course, this is a recent event. There's not a whole lot of studying on online learning. The pandemic brought a lot of it to life, a lot of the perks, a lot of the cons, a lot of it, and more attention is brought on online learning due to our recent pandemic. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed.